You're watching the press preview then. As we head into a new week, we can look at what is on the front pages. Tonight, we'll see what's making the headlines with the economics correspondent at the Spectator, Kate Andrews, and the new Statesman's political editor, Stephen Bush. A very good evening to both of you. Chatting to them in a moment. First of all, let's take a look at some of the front pages then, starting with the Metro, leading with two milestones in Britain's fight against COVID-19, with 30 million people having had their first vaccine and family friends in England able to meet outdoors all from tomorrow. The Telegraph reports that the term BAME should no longer be used by organisations and companies, according to a report from Boris Johnson's Racial Disparities Commission. The Guardian speaks with the leader of Britain's police chiefs, who has said the force's legitimacy in black communities is so low and vows to end generations of strained trust and confidence. On to the Times, leading with one of the country's most senior police officers who believes schools have covered up sexual offences in the past to protect their reputations. Here's Monday's FT, which says Britain's third biggest steel producer, GFG Alliance, is scrambling to raise funds for loans outside the UK to prevent financial collapse. The Daily Mirror looks further into claims made by American businesswoman Jennifer Arcuri concerning her relationship with Prime Minister Boris Johnson. And I'm joined tonight by Kate Andrews and Stephen Bush. Great to see you both. Thanks for being with us on the eve of easing of lockdown restrictions. Finally, feels like it's taken forever, Kate, doesn't it? And the front of the Metro, Jabby Monday, not the greatest headline, but certainly a good news story, I think, as long as things go according to plan.
Well, yes, indeed. One of the reasons it feels like it's taking so long is because it is. This is set to be the longest lockdown that England has had so far by a matter of months, really. Tomorrow will be when we have more freedoms to be outside in a group up to 6 people, or 2 different households, which can be up to more than 6 people, but only from 2 different households. And of course, crucially, that stay-at-home messaging changes. So you don't have to have a reasonable excuse to leave your home any longer. You can be out and about enjoying yourself outside, of course, with that cap of people on it. The government has taken the most cautious approach to leaving lockdown. Of course, the major difference between the other times and this time is that we now have a very successful vaccine rollout, and that is what the front page of the Metro is highlighting. We've now hit another milestone with 30 million people having had at least their first injection. Very recently, we got to half of the adult population. And by the Spectator's data tracker, it looks like we could be hitting that milestone of all the over 50s and most vulnerable people jabbed earlier than the 15th of April, which is the government's deadline, but potentially at the beginning of April, if we can keep up the pace. So there is a lot of good news here. But as you mentioned, Jonathan, it is taking quite a bit of time. And of course, people are growing more and more restless. Outdoor activity is certainly welcome, but we are still months away from being able to get back to something that feels like normal.
Yeah, I mean, just on that, Kate, do you think it's too cautious? Do you think the government could have sped things up a bit?
I think if you're going to say data, not dates, you really have to commit to that. And the data has been so overwhelmingly positive. Unsurprisingly, vaccines work. And already we're seeing that vaccine factor in the data. And of course, we've known for a very long time now that outdoor activity in particular has a very, very low risk of transmitting the virus. So unfortunately, I don't think we always have been following the data and the scientific evidence. I think if we were, it actually could certainly be leading to a faster reopening.
OK, let's look at the front of The Guardian, Stephen. Warning to England as lockdown is eased. I mean, this is the big fear, isn't it, that people will push things too far. I mean, even today I was taking the dogs out for a walk and saw people playing golf on a local golf course already. I mean, do you think people will stick to the guidelines, or do you think people are going to see this as a sort of chance to get away with all sorts, especially if they've had the jab?
Well, I think with any law or regulation, there's always some law breaking at the margin. I think Kate's exactly right. The one problem we've created for ourselves, because the understanding of the risks of the coronavirus, it has not been as widespread as one would like, and it doesn't seem to have informed government policy some of the time. Ultimately, those people playing golf have more chance of becoming the first British people to be killed by a falling satellite than they do of catching COVID outside. So I think we can, to be honest, live with a little bit of law breaking outside. I think the risk is if people don't understand that, do they think, well, we're allowed to meet outside, we're taking a risk anyway, might as well gather indoors, a much riskier activity until people have got their jab and the whole and we've all got our jabs. That, I think, is the risk. But I think, to be honest, all the evidence is British people have followed the rules, the vast majority of them at least, and I don't see any reason to believe then that will change.
And Stephen, I mean, the other good news today, the Moderna jabs are on the way.
Yeah, and this is the fantastic thing, right? Then, as well as the the existing vaccines, which not only work, but we've had a pretty good stress test and they work here and in Israel, we have another set of vaccines that have also been approved, also shown to be very effective, coming on stream. So the era in which we will all have, well, I say we'll all have matching ones to go with our TB jabs, and I remember in terms of people in big cities who have their TB jabs, but I'll have my matching jab very soon, and then hopefully we'll all be able to do things like this in person again.
Let's move on to the Daily Telegraph. Great picture of two people in a swimming pool there, outdoor swimming pool. Don't know if we can see that front page of the Telegraph. I mean, how tempting that looks. Can't wait to plunge into a pool once again. But the story they're focusing on is jab checks maybe last straw for pubs. Kate, and we know this is a real concern for publicans. And writing for the Daily Telegraph, the boss of Wetherspoons, never short of a comment or two.
No, Tim Martin isn't. So the Telegraph's headline is prompted because Tim Martin has written for the paper today, suggesting that a vaccine passport scheme could just be detrimental as pubs try to reopen. And this is a debate that's going to be playing out. We know that these ideas are under review right now. We have gone a long way in a very short period of time from the health secretary saying that this is not a paper where this is not a country, apologies, it's not a country where you carry papers. The vaccine minister, Nadhim Zawahi, suggesting that they were not considering vaccine or immunity passports, and now they're all anybody can talk about. And the Prime Minister has confirmed that they are considering them as a way to reopen potentially at full capacity when we're allowed to do so. I think there are going to be a lot of hurdles here, but the major question that I think a lot of these owners of pubs and restaurants will have is, to what extent will this really be voluntary? It's one thing to say you as a private landowner get to choose who comes in and out of your premises, but it's quite another to say you technically have the choice, but if you don't require checks at the door, you don't require people to show their vaccine papers or their negative COVID test, you can only open at 60 or 75% capacity. That is essentially making it mandatory because it will be very hard to make a profit with that kind of capacity. So a lot is riding on these reviews. Everyone's been focused on the roadmap, but really some of those crucial questions around social distancing and how we can actually go back to normal have yet to come. They've saved the hardest decision for the reviews that are being undertaken now.
Yeah, and of course, Stephen, it's not just pubs, is it? It's going to be sporting events, potentially, outdoor gatherings, festivals. Where do you stand on the debate?
Well, I think, one, it would be quite troubling for us to move towards having quite an extensive level of biosecurity and biosurveillance as a society. I don't think that's desirable. But I also think, I don't often find myself siding with Tim Martin, but there's a first time for everything here. We've asked hospitality to bear an awful lot of costs over the last year. Yes, they've received subsidy for salaries and for rent, but they're fixed costs, goods that they've ordered in the open again, closed again, off and on, right? These businesses have a lot of debt and a lot of losses as they come out of the pandemic. It is not reasonable, if the government is going to require this, whether they do that de facto or de jure, it is not reasonable to make hospitality pay for it in terms of the additional costs of enforcing it, not least because many of them simply won't be able to, and they already face a very difficult second half of 2021.
Yeah, and I suppose, Stephen, you know, the publicans and large hospitality venues are going to say, well, look, we've already spent a fortune making our premises COVID safe, and now you're asking us to spend even more money, potentially. Yeah,
and the additional problem is a lot of the things people are asked to do to make their businesses COVID safe, no one will make you COVID safe than if we sort of put, I don't know, like a rosary and some salt in the corner, right? Yeah, those perspex walls don't do very much. And businesses have been asked to come up with those costs up front themselves. So I think it is very reasonable for businesses to turn around and go, look, if we're going to have to do this, Rishi, you've got to put your own hand in your pocket, mate.
OK. Kate, let's move on to the Financial Times. The Prime Minister obviously focusing on the positives, especially tomorrow with us all getting some form of freedom back. But there are many negatives as well. John Lewis has really struggled, hasn't it, during this pandemic? And it's now going to set store by Waitrose to try and help the company.
I think Stephen hit a lot of the economic analysis on the head there and the struggle that this has been. But this story is highlighting the ways that consumer behavior have just massively changed, very much been accelerated, really, those changes during the COVID crisis. And now many of these big shops are asking themselves, do we need these in-person premises? Do we need these big shops to actually make good for what the customers want us to deliver? And John Lewis is going to be looking to Waitrose. They've done a detailed analysis of more than 20 million customers across their departments. And what they're finding is that they can keep some of those really big shops. They do find that people are driven to them, but some of the smaller outlets, they're more likely to close down. And this has very big implications, especially for the labor market, for people who are working in retail, questions around their jobs. And it's one of the reasons we are pretty sure that unemployment is going to continue to tick up even as the economy reopens, because unfortunately, we're going to discover that a lot of those millions of people on furlough, hopefully not that many, but potentially millions of people on furlough, don't have jobs to go back to. Nobody knows exactly what that number will be. The good news is that it's being revised downwards. The comeback of a strong economy is thought to help the labor market, but in reality, there's going to be some major change, and it's going to happen quite quickly.
Yeah, so many unknowns, Stephen, aren't there? And it does feel that the last year has almost accelerated things when it comes to retail and when it comes to the high street.
Yeah, and that acceleration is the crucial point. We've all known, and we've been talking on programs like this for years about the decline of the high street, the move to online retailers. Of course, the difficulty is what may have happened this year is that process has happened too quickly for businesses to adapt, and this will result in more job losses than that process we would have expected to see at a faster rate than new jobs are created. And it's particularly difficult, not just for John Lewis. They're a big company; they'll almost certainly be fine. The beloved brand. But if you think about, say, Birmingham New Street, which has a beautiful big John Lewis, and it's very, very nice redesign. It's really the jewel of that development. What does the absence of John Lewis mean for that station, for the surrounding areas? The high streets around the United Kingdom have lost their John Lewis's, which really are sort of anchor institutions for those high streets. Potentially, it's going to be a very painful transition and a very difficult 3 to 4 years as a result, particularly, of course, if distanced working remains a big feature of how we live and work.
Very quickly, I'm going to ask you both, what are you most looking forward to tomorrow? Kate?
I'm not sure I'm going to be doing it tomorrow. I'll be at work, but I am looking forward to sitting in a park with a few friends and having a drink.
Stephen?
Well, I'm actually on holiday from tomorrow, so I will be in my local park working on my tan. So I'm very much looking forward to that.
Well, the weather is going to be great, apparently, next few days. Thank you both very much. Speak after the break, because coming up, the clocks have gone forward by an hour, but it takes a whole day for Parliament's 2,000 clocks to catch up. We'll look at that story in the Metro. Welcome back. Part 2 of the press preview. Economics correspondent at the Spectator, Kate Andrews, and the New Statesman's political editor, Stephen Bush, both still with me. Stephen, let's get cracking. Front page of the Daily Telegraph. Now, this is interesting. Scrap use of BAME label, according to an independent report. The acronym is outdated. What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, this is an interesting story of true. I mean, the government does actually already doesn't use this, and they have a pretty useful explanation on the Cabinet Office website as to why. Because the average person from a Black, Asian, or other minority ethnic background doesn't understand what the word BAME means, and the ones who do understand it mostly don't think it's a particularly useful term, because it lumps in a whole variety of people, and lots of people don't really understand it. Like, they go, okay, does this include me? Does it not include me? So that bit, I think, is not that surprising. I think it does raise the question about this commission, which is it going to add anything all that new? Then Theresa May's actually a pretty good disparity audit, which looked at all of the inequalities across race, class, gender, place. It was a really good bit of work. Yeah, whether or not this commission is really going to add anything. And if this recommendation is a sign of what's in it, the answer to that is going to be no. But it's a very sensible recommendation. There is a reason why the government doesn't use it. It doesn't mean anything to most people.
Kate?
Yeah, as Stephen says, this is already made very clear on the government's website, the reasons that they aren't using this term. I suppose you could say that the Independent Commission might be raising it because it has become a very mainstream term, and many organizations outside of government do use it, and it's constantly used in daily discourse, especially in the media. So perhaps they're trying to highlight that, and for good reason, trying to highlight that it's not a good idea to try to lump everybody together when they're, very individualistic or specific circumstances for different ethnic minority groups. And also, as Stephen says, it's a term that doesn't resonate with a lot of people either because they don't identify that way or they don't understand it. So it might be the highlighting element might be quite good, but I think Stephen's quite right to point out that actually has been highlighted for quite some time on an official government website.
OK, all right. And on to the Metro. This debate's been going on for some days now, hasn't it, about Batley Grammar School and the whole debate about whether we should ban things because it offends people of one religion, Stephen.
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways, right, the should we ban things part of this is not actually a particularly interesting or useful debate, right? That's what this letter writer is taking offence to, and it's what the sort of latest bit in the story, which is people calling explicitly for lessons like that to be banned. Now, I think ultimately you can come up with if you can come up with a pedagogic rationale, so a good teaching rationale to go, here's why teenagers not only need to be told that a cartoon of Muhammad is offensive to practicing Muslims, but to be shown a cartoon. Now, I don't think that should be banned, but I don't think it necessarily reflects very well on a school if you think that some teenagers need to be shown a cartoon to understand what a cartoon is. But I think one of the problems we have with this story is we're still missing one of the crucial bits of information, which is what was the actual content of this class. I think we can all agree that it should not be prohibited to display a cartoon of the Prophet Muhammad if that's your bag. What we don't yet know is what actually happened in this classroom.
Yeah, exactly. Kate, we haven't got time for your thoughts on that because I just want to squeeze this picture in. We've only got 20 seconds, rather appropriately. Time flies when you're changing 2,000 clocks. A great picture there of the Speaker of the House helping to put them all forward by now.
Yeah, we've all probably gone around our homes today and updated the various clocks, but that has been on overdrive in Parliament, where the Speaker of the House has had to do this, not personally, but had to instruct to make sure it's done to over 2,000 clocks to make sure that MPs are on time. Now they don't have any excuse. What I want to know is how many were using that as an excuse in the first place to show up late to work. I think that's the outstanding question in this story.
Great. Speaking clock would have been a better headline, I think. Kate, Stephen, thank you both very much.